Hey, welcome to the Duke Over podcast. Today we have an exciting episode with Dr. José Morey, who is also known as Dr. Intergalactic. Dr. José is a chief executive officer and founder of Astra Media LLC. He's an Eisenhower fellow and a co-founder of Ever Medical Technologies. He's a health and technology keynote speaker, author, consultant for NASA, Forbes, MIT, the United Nations World Food Program, and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He is considered the world's first intergalactic doctor and is often featured on Forbes, Univision, CNBC, and NASA 360. He coined Puerto Rico as the future Silicon Island, as appeared in Forbes, The Weekly Journal, Reddit, and Hispanic Executive. And along with Frank Carvajal, he is the co-author of Latinx Business Success. And he is on a mission to inspire underrepresented communities to pursue STEM and STEAM careers. Zay, welcome on.
Raúl, muchas gracias. Pleasure to be on.
How you doing, man? Good to connect.
I'm good. How are you?
Doing wonderful, man. Hey, so you do quite a bit, and I know we just read your intro, but I really want to hone in, first of all, on the essence as to why, play on words, how that's stemmed into a lot of the media that you're doing and how those correlate and how they feed each other. I'm assuming there's a natural flywheel, but I'd love to hear first your story and also what does that flywheel look like?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I appreciate it. It's really an amalgamation of my background of how this came to be, essentially. So, for your audience, thank you so much for listening in. Originally from Cagos, Puerto Rico, born and raised there. I left the island when I was very young with my parents, and then grew up in Florida after that. I went to medical school, so I'm a physician by formal training. And after finishing my medical training, I studied computer science, self-taught, and I started doing a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence, data innovation fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. I had a friend doing an executive MBA there while I was doing a medical fellowship, and we ended up getting involved in a lot of kind of AI medical applications. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth in the technology world, essentially. And then my career really took a vastly different path than your traditional physicians did. I started doing a lot of tech consulting, like how to incorporate AI into medicine. And when I started doing it, there weren't many physicians that were really in the space. AI was just starting to have a renovation or uplifting of the applications. People were starting to do a lot of things. A renaissance is the term I was looking for. And then that gave me the opportunity to actually start working with IBM. I started working in research. They had reached out to me after I did a presentation on some of the work that I had been doing. And we started doing research. They said, "Hey, would you be willing to work with us on Watson?" And at that time, Watson was just getting a lot of hype, especially after winning Jeopardy. I don't know if you or some people in the audience might
Yeah, I
remember.
definitely followed that. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. That was like the pinnacle of what I was doing. I would love to work with that. So I started in the research for out of San Jose. And eventually a lot of what we did in that lab and several other research labs throughout the world, Melbourne, Australia, Haifa, Israel, Zurich. And that essentially became what was known as Watson Health. So Watson Health was developed. I transitioned over to Watson Health, eventually worked my way up to Associate Chief Health Officer, reporting to the Chief Health Officer for IBM Watson, developing real world data evidence gathering and real world implementation. That was essentially my role as Associate CHO. Worked for IBM for several years. Then I left IBM and stayed in the tech world, started helping startups, started helping government agencies. I worked on the COVID task force called COVID-19, developing AI applications to
Really?
expedite research within the medicine, which helped a lot of the things that we were able to develop quickly came from that cohort and kind of team that was developed for Google and other kind of leading AI entities throughout the world, to working with the World Food Program and helping them develop their AI applications
Wow.
to push their mission. And then ultimately I became an Eisenhower fellow. And
Tell us what that is, guys. Just
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
dropping a lot of really cool things and it's like casual. Like this is not casual. This is amazing.
Oh, no, thanks, man. Yeah. The Eisenhower fellowships are fellowships for mid-career, essentially executives or entrepreneurs or just professionals that have achieved a level of excellence in whatever area of career that they've done, but that they're at an inflection point and they're looking for what they're going to take from their background and look to leverage new experiences to to what their next chapter or their next mission is going to be. And that's really what started my journey into media. And the
Mm,
reason I decided to to do it is I was giving a talk at a big conference, and someone came up to me who actually was another fellow. His name's William Hurley. He goes by Worley. He leads one of the largest quantum computing companies that are out there right now. But he actually came up to me. He's like, "Man, you do a lot of stuff. You've done so many cool things. If you could boil your essence down into one thing, what would you do next?" And there's been something that's been in the back of my mind, tickling and really upsetting me in a way. And it was a problem that I kept seeing, and I really wanted to fix it. And the problem was that in as many of cool projects that I've been able to work with or cool companies, and I've been consultant for NASA's accelerator iTech for many years, and worked with many government and private agencies. I was almost in some projects, I'd be the only person from any kind of underrepresented background whatsoever working on
mm,
the project, sometimes dozens or up to hundreds of people working on projects. And then in other projects, I'd just simply be the only Latino that was working on the project.
yeah.
The thing was that in tech, there's so much money and you see how much money is being made, but there's just such a lack of representation of
Mm,
underserved communities within these industries. That's why you don't see as much generational wealth development in underserved communities, because they're not in the industries at the levels of representation that they need to be to really move the needle forward for their communities. And that's also why you see things that happen like during the pandemic, right? Where yes, it's something that affected everyone, but it's something that disproportionately affected Black and Brown people more than anyone else, because most of our communities have to work on those front end jobs. They have to work on jobs that do get affected by global pandemics, that get affected by climate change. They can't just sit behind a computer and just transition to working from home. They still have to physically go out to do their jobs, physical labor. And often those jobs are minimum wage jobs. You're a server, you're making a few bucks plus tips. If you're day labor, you're making whatever you're making there. If you're minimum wage, wherever it is in the country, and minimum wage here in this country is not a living wage. So most people that work those jobs have to work multiple minimum wage jobs to make a living and to survive. We wanted to fix that problem. And I
mm,
started thinking about what were potential solutions for that. So I started talking with kids and started seeing who it was, what did they dream about being? And I think we all know it. Most kids, if you talk to them, who do they follow on social media? What is cool to them? And what do they see as their potential areas of upward mobility? And for most of us, if you talk to Puerto Ricanos or you talk to others, a lot of kids want to be athletes, right? They want to be ball players, basketball, football, whatever, soccer, or they want to be musicians, reggaetoneros, or whatever. That's what they see,
yeah,
and
it's
that's what
fame. There's like there's like a desire, a higher desire to be well known right now. And
right.
that's just because through the media of what I personally see being exposed to. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
label or compartmentalize, but I think it's all about desire to be known.
Yeah, I think that's a huge component. The other is the desire also, that's what they see as success, right?
Yeah.
That's success. It's fame, but it's also fortune. But in reality, it's a lot easier to make 1,000 nurses or 1,000 engineers than it is to make 1,000 LeBron James or 1,000 Bad Bunnies. That's just the reality of the situation. And only
Yeah.
going to be one of those. The making it in music or making it in sports is such a minuscule percentage, but if you can get communities to start idolizing more engineers, nurses, doctors, computer scientists, then those kids will start going into those fields, and those kids will then start generating $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year. And if you can get every child that's born that comes within our communities to go and start making six figures, that is transformational to the community. That is true economic power, and that is
Mm,
true generational wealth development. So that's what we set out to do. We set out to create a media company that does two things. One, makes science engaging. It makes it cool. It shows representation within media to get kids to dream about it, and also to make science cool just for everybody. Because I think there's another component to what we see in society, that there's a lack of understanding or respect or appreciation for the scientific method, for facts, for truth, how you derive truth.
it's
And
one way to derive truth, right? And but I think focusing on the process, because we're all mini scientists, right? Making observations. In my opinion,
yeah.
that's what I recently wrote, that we all have to be mini scientists. Even in I'm clearly not a scientist, but I have to be with marketing and with research
Oh,
and with pricing and
100,
with sales.
100%. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about it where he says, we're all explorers or we're all scientists. Everyone, when you're little, you're always trying to figure out how things work. right?
Yeah.
And you tend to lose that sometimes as you get older. Life gets in the way or cynicism gets in the way. But we're in the business of creating dreams. That's what Ad Astra is all about. That's what we produce. We produce dreams. So if you
Hmm.
can make content that has diversity in it, that shows a little Latina girl or a little Black boy or a little person with an amputation or an implant and make and normalize it as the
Inclusive.
protagonist.
Yeah.
Inclusive, yeah, as a protagonist in a story and just show that anyone can be a scientist, anyone can be an engineer, anyone can be a technologist. Then once the kids see it, they can be it. If they don't even have that representation, then they don't have a concept that they can even be those things. And this isn't just something theoretical. This has been proven. Anecdotally, you see it in things like the movie Encantos, right? When it came out, there's that viral video that went out, that little boy that looked like the little boy in the movie, and he thought the movie was about him. So it was just having someone that looks like you. Representation can move the needle forward so much. Mae Jemison, who's the first African American female astronaut to go into space, she was inspired by Uhura on the original Star Trek. The single Black character on there inspired her to go into space. And that's the thing that you see. And we see that with the content that we're creating. We work with, obviously, we do things here in the States, but we also do international work with a lot of nonprofits where we take our content and we utilize it for different aspects, typically for education for kids. There's one particular project that we do in Mexico where we use our comic to teach kids about climate change, about sustainability, and about growing their own greenhouses and their own food and sustainability. But in our comic, we have a little Mexican girl who's one of the astronauts or they go out into space and learn about these things. And in these communities, rural communities in Mexico, oftentimes only the boys are promoted to go to school beyond the fifth grade because they're low income communities and they have to decide which if the boy or the girl to send, and they often tend to send the boys and the girls stay home. But now you talk to these kids who don't have electricity, don't have internet, and are usually only thinking of staying within their communities. Now you ask them what they want to be. These are 6, 7, 8, 12-year-old kids. And they're all boys and girls are all dreaming about being astronauts. They're all dreaming about
Hmm.
being doctors. And it's just very simple representation within a piece of media, like a comic that has changed their whole perspective on
Association, exposure, and just planting the seeds pretty much, right?
100%. 100%. And there's actually research on this as well. They've shown that putting these types of things into content, things like Queen's Gambit, that when that came out on Netflix, they saw a huge number, an increase in girls going into chess. Hunger Games or the
Yep.
movie Brave saw a huge number of increase in percentage of girls interested in archery. And you, it's very simple. If you put it in front of someone and people start thinking, oh, I can do that. I can do that. And it's all about planting that seed.
The
100%.
positive
That's
seed. So that is the flywheel essentially of why you're doing media, right? Because you want to be able to create the fuel, but also support the education piece. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, 100%. And as a physician, I see it as an extension of my medical practice. There's only so much I can do one on one with patients day in and day out. But
Yeah.
creating this type of content, I really see as an extension of me trying to heal communities and heal much farther than I could just inside a room seeing 20 patients or 50 patients or whatever it is. This is a way that I can take my medical experience of healing individuals to extension to healing communities.
No, I love that. Tell me a little bit more about, so let's dive in a separate tangent here and also like the day-to-day running, but why did you or how did you like desire to get into this? Because the exposure you're helping solve the problem, but it seems to me like you had already an internal drive. Tell me about that drive and that habit that allowed you to continue to push through because you've been able to do and accomplish really cool things. And there has to be something in regards to the habit or an association that we can take away here as listeners. What can we apply in our day, in our life right now?
Yeah, I would say I don't there's not one thing I would say. It's
There isn't, yeah.
multifactorial, right? It's
Yeah.
multifactorial. It's nature and nurture kind of thing. I would say that the nurture component of it is really like in mi abuelita growing up in Puerto Rico, she was hugely influential. My grandparents, I think most anyone who comes from a Latino background or most that come from a Latino background, their family is hugely influential
Yep.
and oftentimes a matriarchal or at least a grandparent type figure tends to play a big role in that. And for me, is definitely mi abuela. On my mother's side, she used to take care of us, take care of me, especially because I was the baby. And her and my grandfather were and very influential. They were very poor and never knew we were poor or understood that they were poor. Because grandma was the type of person that always had something to give, always
Mm.
had something. No matter how little she had, she
It's the
always had
beauty,
something.
right? It's
Yeah.
always beautiful.
And she was always the kind of person that she was always thinking about others and always, even if she didn't have, she would always be thinking of, oh, I haven't seen this person in a long time, but I'm going to buy them something from like the dollar store or whatever and have it and package it. And she would squirrel away all these little presents. And someone that she hadn't seen like in 10 years would finally show up because everyone would eventually come back around. And she'd be like, wait, I have something for you. And she would have bought it how many years back? But she would remember where she had it and she would go find it and it was wrapped and ready to go for that person. And she also was the kind of person that always thought that if one can eat, we all can eat. So she always was always so giving. And then from my grandfather's perspective, it was the same thing. He'd always tell me, oh, that was his nickname for me. He'd be like, when you become a big rich doctor, don't forget for every one clinic that you make $1, make sure you make 2 clinics in which you give $2 back. So he was always very much influential when it comes to giving back to the community. So that's definitely the kind of the nurture component to it. The nature component, I would say, is losing that fear of failure.
Mm.
Losing that fear of failure is something that's very difficult to do. But once you master that component of understanding that failure is the most integral aspect of success. Like the
It's
only
like a
reason,
prerequisite. You have to
yeah,
fail a lot.
yeah, 1000%. And like you mentioned when I was just talking things here, like you're dropping things that are so nonchalant. And I'm like, it's because you're just seeing the peak, right? You're just seeing the
Yeah.
mountaintop. You're not seeing like all the shit underneath of how many times I fell. So it's because I stand on a lot of that failure that I've reached any level of success. And I think it's pretty much true for almost everyone, if not for everyone. It's the
What would
fact
you
that,
say? No, 100%. What would you say to a perfectionist? Because I think a lot people struggle with that because, oh, I don't want to do it because it's not perfect yet or it's not ready. How did you get over that yourself?
it took a lot of time. And the interesting thing about lessons that you learn, it's that even though you learn them, it's things that you will always struggle with.
Hmm.
As a physician, as in medicine, we're always trained to never make a mistake because honestly, in healthcare, when you make a mistake,
For death.
yeah, it's life or death. So I had to move away from that perspective that was trained into me. And it took a lot of time. Public speaking helps because public speaking is not something that at least it wasn't natural for me. So it's something that I had to put myself in positions that were uncomfortable. And I think that's a big part of it, putting yourself uncomfortable positions. I often tell people that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room. You need to be in a place that is stretching you, whether it's mentally, physically, intellectually, professionally, personally, spiritually. You need to be in places that are just slightly beyond the edge of your skill set. And that's how you grow. It's like working out, right? You work out not with what you can do, you work out with just a little bit more than what you can do. That way you break down the muscle and it builds back up even stronger. It's the same thing. So to be able to overcome that fear of failure, you have to put yourself in places that you will fail. You can't stay in the comfort zone. You have to move out of the comfort zone.
Continue to be a beginner. It's really humbling too, but it's also the self-awareness that you mentioned to be able to take action. Like on a silly story, like I took a different surfboard out the other day and I sucked. I totally sucked. And it was like horribly embarrassing, but it was also at the same time like, dang, this is what it feels like to start over again. But yeah, I think it's in more of a professional setting. It's a little bit harder because sometimes we're afraid of the consequence. But I think what you mentioned, and I love this term, I'm going to use this moving forward. You're standing on your failures. That's the only reason why you can stand.
Yeah.
And if you
More,
can't, and then, well, how much have you failed? And this isn't to say that we seek out failure for failure's sake. It's like you seek out an ambitious goal and know in the beginning, and it will be very, you may not be 100% the best. That's why you do version 2, version 3, version 4, so on and
right?
so forth. Moving on to the business front. So the flywheel is the love for the community support and expose them to the sciences, STEM, and creating media to create that exposure. What is it like for you at the helm running an impact-based organization? Because it is impact-based. Your mission is, doesn't mean it has to be like a nonprofit, but your mission is impact. How do you marry both the business needs because you need revenue, you need growth, plus the impact? And how do you foster that culture remotely?
Yeah. I think one of the things you need to have and this has been advice that I've gotten from several people, is at the core, just be true to the mission. Don't lose sight of the mission. If you're true to the mission, everything else tends to fall into place. You need to build a village of people that, because there's that old African adage that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So you need to build allies, find those allies. You'll find the people that you should be working with that will help you and help others along the way. Do it just for the sake of helping people, but I'm a firm believer in that the energy you put out, you end up getting back in some way. Make sure that when you can help, you do help for no reason. And I feel like that's just building the ethos and the culture of who you are and who the company is. You do need to have a balance from a practical perspective of revenue to keep the lights on and keep growing organically, but keep the core mission. It means that you have to say no sometimes to the things that you can't do because you just can't economically support it.
Yep.
But you have to have kind of as long as you keep the core with, all right, this is our North Star. Like, we're doing these other things, but ultimately we're going to funnel things that will help us continue to steer towards our North Star and never steering too much away from it. You can veer a little bit because you have to understand the market. You have to understand the realities of the situation, but you're always keeping an eye on your North Star. And when you have the opportunity, you start steering back towards that, understanding it's your ultimate goal. So that's the best kind of metaphorical way that I can say to do it. And I feel like if you stick to that and you're true to that mission, the people that you should be working with will show up. So the organizations, the individuals, the partners, the clients that will keep the doors open will show up and will help you stay true to your path and will support you on your path.
What's the time horizon that you saw? Because I know in the beginning, when you set out on the mission, when you set out on doing the work, you do have early a lot of high energy to continue to produce it, get revenue generating, get the team going. But when did you start seeing the inflection point where the organic or the word of mouth or the reach started to spread, where it compounded, where your one effort created 5 opportunities or 5 new openings instead of one effort for one opportunity?
Yeah. I would say beginning of year 3. Beginning of year 3 is really when it started for us. Years 1 and 2 were very hard. Year 3, which we're just finishing up, year 3, this has been our peak year. Year 4 is already gearing up to be even bigger than this year. Yeah. Beginning of year 3. But for some people, it could take much longer. It could be 5
Oh, yeah, I'm
years.
not to say this is exactly the trend, but
Yeah.
it's actually really close to the trend that I'm hearing online anyways, and
Oh,
for you to
really?
stick through. Yeah, it's usually the first 18 months, you start getting some traction, and then it's within the 33-year mark, but it's again sticking through, which I wanna carry back to the mission, because the number one word that I care about is consistency, which is performance over time. That requires discipline, that requires high character, that requires belief. Belief that
Yeah.
this is worth fighting for and that you have the team to carry that on. I think to close out, what's the one thing that's like super exciting you right now? Because your field is, in my opinion, like only in the up and up. What's exciting you now and what's exciting for you in the future?
Oh my gosh. There's so much cool stuff going on right now. For us, from a business perspective, we're always developing new content, both for partners and that's our own intellectual property. So for those listening, always be checking out our website, sign up for our email server so that we can send it to you. Follow us on Instagram at Dr. Intergalactic for all the things we're doing. We got new books coming out. Good night, little computer scientist. Good night, little mining engineer. Those are fun. We have our first animated short coming out, Sombras, which is we've already been on the festival circuit. It's been winning some awards, but we're about to release it to the world for more people to see it beyond just the festival circuit. And I think that's going to be, people are going to love that when they start seeing. We have our first live action film,
Oh, wow.
short film that's coming out called Launch Fever. So that'll be out February, March. That's what we're targeting. And then there's so much cool stuff going on in virtual reality. Some people like the term metaverse, but really it's just virtual reality or a kind of immersive experiences and be able to storytell and new medium and reaching new kinds of generations and new types of interactions, I think are so cool.
Which one are you more bullish on, AR or VR?
Um, AR, because VR has a platform limitation that not everyone has. AR is it's more normal to how we interact. The iPhone was so successful when it
Yeah.
came out because it had the aesthetic component. It was great technology, but it had normal aesthetic to how you interact. We've already been interacting with the world in AR. So it's kind of like what people talk about Web 3, right? We're missing the Web 2.5 before we get to the Web 3. You have to kind of transition people to it. And AR is just a natural transition, right? People already have Instagram filters, Snapchat filters. They
Mm.
already they already
They already have a
understand that.
lens to
Yeah,
look through.
exactly. And everybody has a phone. So it's not like you need a new platform. Every single person has a phone. And the technology has gotten to the degree that you can, even if you're low income, you can still have a phone with pretty amazing technology in it, as opposed to the VR. It's still a very high barrier when it comes to buying a platform. And then the operating systems are still very diverse. We do it all the time. We build things for clients for the different VR headsets, but it's dramatically different, or at least different enough that it requires a lift to do. Similar to, I like to give the example of gaming, right? Gaming has your PlayStation, your Xbox, your Wii. You used to have Sega and TurboGrafx 16, if you want to go way back, or Atari, right? There's a lot of different platforms that have been there over time. And yes, there are some games that you can play for all of them, but there are still games that are they only really play well on one system. So you have to take that into consideration. And then there's so many new platforms that are coming out. We still don't know who's going to be the winner or loser as of yet. So
Like
that's why
the
I'm way more good.
You're right. No, it's just like when the iPhone came out too, there was how many phones in the marketplace, and then now it's like the last two, Samsung and iPhone, and we know who the clear winner is, right?
Right. But even then, that's another good example. Even then, there are definitely apps that work for both, but there's still apps that are only Apple iOS. And then there's only apps that only work on Android. And even that, you still have some things that are only built for one operating system. So VR is still it's still evolving. AR, I'm way more bullish because that one is more natural and has a lot bigger reach in the market already.
I love it. For all our listeners out there, Jose, what's the best place for people to, one, thank you for being on, and two, learn a little bit more about what you're up to and follow you?
Instagram, go to at Dr. Intergalactic, and we put all the things that are coming out there. So follow us on Instagram, and then go to our website at astrasteam.com, and you can join our email blast and always stay up to date. And there is Black Friday around the corner, and then Christmas and Hanukkah and Boxing Day not too far after that. Our books and our comics are great for kids.
Good for the gifts, and I appreciate that. We'll put the links in the show notes. Jose, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would really appreciate it.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.